It began with an image, a single prompt typed into an artificial intelligence tool, a city burning under an orange sky. For most people, it would have stayed a fantasy picture, a creative spark lost among millions of AI-generated images. But for one man, it became prophecy. Days later, parts of Los Angeles looked exactly like that digital nightmare. January 18, 2025. A dry wind moved through the canyons of Pacific Palisades. Just after midnight, the first call crackled through dispatch. Brush fire near Temescal Canyon Trail. By dawn, flames stretched more than 6 miles, jumping freeways, devouring homes, turning palm trees into torches. When the sun rose, 12 people were dead. Over 6,800 structures lay in ash. It was the most destructive urban interface fire in Southern California's history. And hidden behind those flames was a story no one could have imagined. A story that began not with gasoline or matches, but with a computer. The fire that shouldn't have happened. Investigators from CAL FIRE arrived within hours. They knew this terrain. Fires had come close before, but never this fast, never this hot. One veteran investigator said later, "Every fire leaves a fingerprint. This one left several. 3 separate ignition points. No fallen power line, no lightning, no accidental campfire. Someone had lit it deliberately." The governor declared a state of emergency before noon. Helicopters filled the sky, reporters lined Pacific Coast Highway, and terrified families crowded evacuation centers. For a week, California lived under a red sky. When the flames finally died, so did the public's patience. Who would do something like this, and why? At first, detectives chased ghosts, a rumored eco-terrorist group, a disgruntled developer, even a copycat of past arsonists. Each lead collapsed. Then, quietly, a digital forensics unit inside the FBI noticed something strange. The online footprints. Across several Reddit and Discord communities devoted to AI art, a user called Flame Reseed had posted dozens of images of California wildfires. They weren't random landscapes. They showed the Palisades coastline from exact vantage points. Angles later matched to where investigators found the first ignition sites. Metadata timestamps? Hours before the actual fire began. When the FBI subpoenaed the account data, the IP traces pointed to a small apartment complex in Orlando, Florida. That was more than 2,000 miles from the burn zone. But the username matched a known alias of Jonathan Rinderknecht, a 29-year-old freelance IT worker. Agents dug deeper. They found more than art. Private chat logs described cleansing flames and resetting the coast. Another message read, "The simulation starts Saturday." Saturday, January 18th. Who was Jonathan Rinderknecht? Born in 1996 in Tampa, Jonathan had shown brilliance early, top scores in programming, early fascination with generative AI. But by his mid-20s, his life unraveled. Neighbors recalled erratic behavior, talking to himself about purification through fire. A 2023 psych evaluation mentioned delusional ideation, yet he refused treatment. He bounced between tech support contracts, posting late-night AI experiments, surreal images of storms, smoke, chaos. To most followers, he was another online eccentric. To investigators, he was becoming a suspect. When agents checked flight records, they found he'd flown from Orlando to Burbank 3 days before the Palisades ignition and back again the night after. Credit card receipts showed purchases of lighter fluid, drone batteries, and a rental car parked near Temescal Canyon. Digital forensics breakthrough. The real turning point came from his computer. After months of coordination, the FBI obtained a search warrant and cloned his external SSD drives. What they discovered stunned even veteran cyber analysts. On OneDrive, a folder titled Prometheus Series. Inside, 47 AI-generated images depicting coastal Los Angeles engulfed in fire. File metadata revealed prompt logs, exact text typed into ChatGPT and diffusion tools. One prompt read, "Generate aerial view of Pacific Palisades hillside fire spreading under Santa Ana winds." Timestamp, January 17th, 11:46 p.m. Within 90 minutes, the real fire began. For prosecutors, that digital trail was gold. They now had what investigators called intent in pixels, an electronic blueprint of the disaster. But the story didn't end there, because the arrest itself would raise a legal question America had never faced. Can a line of AI-generated text prove premeditated murder? The arrest in Orlando. October 8, 2025, a joint team from the FBI and ATF surrounded a storage unit on the outskirts of Orlando. Inside, RinderConnect sat at a folding table lit by a single laptop screen. Agents described rows of SD cards, lighter fluid bottles, and hard drives neatly labeled burn models. When officers entered, he didn't resist. He reportedly looked up and said, "It's already burning somewhere else." He was flown to California and charged in federal court with malicious use of fire resulting in death, a capital offense carrying life imprisonment or the death penalty.
In his first hearing, the judge ordered him held without bond, citing mental health instability and flight risk. Prosecutors revealed partial evidence, flight paths from his drone, phone GPS logs, and those AI prompts. Defense counsel immediately argued the government was criminalizing imagination. That single argument would ignite a nationwide debate. For decades, investigators followed trails of fingerprints and ash. Now, the evidence was binary: ones and zeros, timestamps, prompt strings. Federal prosecutor Elena Vargas told reporters, "We used to call handwriting intent. Today, metadata is handwriting." But defense attorney Liam Dorsey fired back. If a writer imagines a crime, is that evidence of guilt? My client was creating digital art, not committing arson. The question sliced deeper than one case. It touched every creator using AI tools, every conversation about privacy and thought. The prosecution countered with a digital forensics timeline. ChatGPT session logs showing repeated wildfire simulations. VPN data placing RenderConnect's laptop in Los Angeles the night before ignition. And thermal images from his rented drone stored on the same drive. Each piece alone might mean nothing. Together, they formed a mosaic too precise to ignore. The courtroom battle begins. The first evidentiary hearing is set for October 17, 2025, and legal analysts are calling it the first AI intent case in U.S. federal history. Prosecutors intend to prove that his digital creations were rehearsals, that the act of generating those images demonstrated willful planning. Meanwhile, public interest exploded. #AI Arson trended on social media. Debates raged over how far digital expression could go before it became criminal planning. Talk show pundits compared it to early 2000s cases, where violent fiction was used as motive evidence. But this time, the artwork wasn't hypothetical. It mirrored the very landscape of destruction. For survivors of the Palisades fire, this wasn't a philosophy question. It was about accountability, about whether technology had handed a disturbed mind new tools to destroy. At St. Monica's evacuation shelter, families still gather each January to light candles for the 12 victims. Among them, 8-year-old Sofia Martinez and her mother, who died trapped in their car on Sunset Boulevard. A volunteer remembers Sofia clutching a plush toy she called Sparkles, found later in the ashes, melted but intact. Those details anchor this tragedy in something real, something deeper than digital evidence. Behind every headline are people who woke to smoke and never saw morning. When jurors one day hear the AI prompts, the burn maps, and the ChatGPT logs, they'll also see those faces. And that contrast, bytes versus lives, will define this trial.
The courtroom smelled faintly of smoke and disinfectant, an accidental mix of burned memory and polished routine. Jonathan Rinderknecht sat motionless beside his attorney, dressed in a plain gray jumpsuit, his eyes fixed on the glowing prosecution monitor. Across the aisle, prosecutors cued a video file, the AI prompt logs. On screen, each entry appeared like a diary of obsession. Generate nighttime wildfire consuming Pacific Palisades cliffs. Simulate ember pattern under Santa Ana wind gusts. Predict direction of evacuation routes. The courtroom was silent, except for the faint clicking of the playback. For every prompt, the timestamp appeared. Then an image, orange and cruel, almost beautiful. A journalist whispered, he rehearsed the disaster. The judge leaned forward. Defense attorney Liam Dorsey rose quickly. Your Honor, these are creative renderings. My client is a digital artist, not a murderer. If an algorithm paints fire, it doesn't make the artist an arsonist. The prosecutor replied evenly. But when the image and the crime are identical, when the art becomes a map, then it is no longer imagination, it's execution. Gasps filled the gallery. This wasn't just a criminal case, it was a referendum on technology itself. Experts testified from both sides. Dr. Lena Roth, a forensic computer scientist, explained how digital evidence is authenticated. She displayed overlapping graphs showing the timestamps of Rinderknecht's prompts aligning perfectly with GPS data from his phone and rental car. One red line, one pattern, the ignition path. Then came the defense expert, Dr. Harrison Lowe, an AI ethicist. Prompting an AI is thought, not action. We must be careful not to criminalize imagination, even disturbing imagination. Women watching at home couldn't decide, was this man a mad visionary lost in delusion, or a cold planner who turned fantasy into fire? Fire investigators rebuilt the night step by step. They found 3 ignition points, each spaced less than 400 yards apart, each showing traces of the same commercial lighter fluid. Drone footage from a bystander captured brief flashes where the flames began. Using simulation software, experts reconstructed the wind flow that night. Overlay those maps on Rinderknecht's digital images, every spark aligned. The probability of coincidence, less than 1 in a billion. Fire investigator Maria Torres testified, voice steady. He knew the topography better than we did. He used AI to plan the path of the flames. Her statement became the headline across the country. The defense pivoted to psychology. They produced medical records showing Rinderknecht's history of schizoaffective episodes, paranoia, and insomnia. In court, they played a fragment of his 2023 therapy session. Sometimes I see the world burning before it does. I just want to make it clean again. The jury shifted uneasily. Was he a mastermind or a man broken by his own delusions?
Psychiatrist Dr. Evelyn Manning told the court, "He was mentally ill but organized. He understood what he was doing." That distinction between illness and responsibility would decide whether he walked out a patient or died in prison. Back in the forensics lab, technicians examined the drives recovered from his storage unit. One contained deleted files labeled trial runs. Data recovery revealed simulation code using open-source weather models predicting wind speed and ember drift. Essentially, he had built a fire modeler, a tool used by professionals, except his version was fed AI predictions and satellite imagery. The FBI found screenshots of him testing it against past fires to validate accuracy. That single piece of code turned the case from circumstantial to conclusive.
This trial is no longer just about Jonathan Rinderknecht. It is about every line of code, every algorithm, every creator who ever typed something dangerous and hit enter. Where does curiosity end and intent begin? Can we punish thoughts if technology makes them real? Legal scholars call this the thought crime frontier. Ethicists see it as inevitable that AI will blur fantasy and action until law catches up. In court, the prosecutor summed it in a sentence. He did not just imagine the fire, he designed it. Outside the courthouse, victims' families stood together under the Palisades Cross Memorial. Photographs of 12 victims lined the sidewalk. Parents, students, firefighters who ran towards the flames and never returned. One father said quietly to reporters, "Whether he used a match or a mouse, our children are gone." That sentence spread across social feeds like a mantra, the perfect summary of what this case really means. If convicted, Rinderknecht faces life without parole under federal statute 18 U.S.C. Section 844I, malicious use of fire resulting in death. Prosecutors may seek the death penalty if intent and premeditation are proved beyond doubt. The defense wants a plea deal, 25 years and mandatory mental treatment. But the Department of Justice has refused so far. They believe a message must be sent, that AI cannot be a shield for murder. Public opinion is split. Polls show 46% support life sentence, 28% support death, and the rest believe mental institution is enough. Reporters describe him now as quiet, reading books on philosophy and machine learning in the Federal Detention Center. He refuses interviews but sent a letter to his sister. "I wanted to see if AI could predict the world. It did. And now the world burns me back." Some psychologists interpret that line as a confession through metaphor. Others see a mind lost in its own creation. Within weeks, major AI platforms announced updates restricting prompt content involving arson, violence, and terror themes. Developers added filters, warning labels, and metadata tracking for law enforcement cooperation. Civil liberty groups protested. If the government reads every prompt, there is no privacy left. Industry leaders countered, "If we ignore what our tools can create, there is no safety left." The echo of that argument will shape policy for years. Months later, the hills of Pacific Palisades began to turn green again. Volunteers planted trees, rebuilt trails, painted murals with the names of the lost. A sign near Temescal Canyon reads, "From ashes we grow." Locals still find bits of glass melted into the soil, reminders of that night. Every January 18th, at exactly midnight, sirens sound for 12 seconds across Los Angeles. 12 lives, 12 seconds of silence. And somewhere in a cold storage room at the FBI lab, the hard drives from this case sit sealed in evidence bags. Digital ashes of a new kind of fire.
The trial hasn't ended yet, but California is already different. Insurance companies call this the most data-driven arson investigation in U.S. history. Law schools teach it as the first AI intent precedent. And in households that once stared at orange skies, the word justice has a new, quieter meaning. The city of Los Angeles rebuilt faster than anyone predicted, yet every new roof reflects the glow of what was lost. People still talk about that January night the way earlier generations talked about earthquakes, as if it cracked the ground under their trust. On a community wall, someone spray-painted, "Machines don't dream, people do." It stayed there for weeks before anyone painted over it. In a sealed FBI lab, agents keep the clone drives under temperature control. They call them digital DNA. Each byte tells a story, not of cells, but of choices. Investigators can replay the moments before the fire, like rewinding time. The cursor blinking, the prompts typed, the images rendered. It's hauntingly precise. Every keystroke is a breath in the chronology of destruction. That precision comforts some. Finally, there is proof. But it terrifies others, because what else can be reconstructed from our digital shadows? Universities hold panels now. When does code become crime? Philosophers compare this case to Frankenstein. Law professors cite it next to the Golden State Killer DNA match. One headline reads, "The fire that wrote the future." Civil liberties advocates warn of overreach. They fear governments could mine private creative data for pre-crime. Supporters argue the opposite, that ignoring digital clues only empower those who weaponize imagination. Somewhere between those extremes lies the truth. Technology is neither good nor evil. It is the mirror that shows us which side we choose to stand on. By week 3 of trial, prosecutors rested their case. They ended with the simplest evidence of all. A single burned drone recovered from the canyon. Inside its blackened body, investigators found an intact SD card. The last image stored showed a flare-igniting brush in the distance, then static. That picture became Exhibit 47. The room went silent. Even the defense attorney paused before objecting. For many, that frame, a tiny camera watching its own crime, was more damning than any AI prompt. The defense called Rinderknecht to the stand. He spoke softly, eyes unfocused. "I wanted to show what would happen if we kept ignoring the droughts. The world burned anyway. I just predicted it." The jury listened. Some nodded, some frowned. His attorney asked him, "Did you start the fire?" "I don't know. Maybe it was already burning." That answer hung in the air like smoke. Impossible to hold, impossible to ignore. Outside the courthouse, protesters split into 2 camps. One side carried signs, "No mercy for murderers." The other side, "He needs help, not death." News drones circled above, capturing the human wildfire of opinion. Talk shows replayed the moment endlessly. Memes appeared, his face half lit by orange flame, captioned, "AI did this." But deeper online, ethicists began calling him a case study instead of a monster. Podcasters analyzed every court filing like scripture. The story had become myth in real time. Then, after 43 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Reporters crowded the corridor, microphones trembling in their hands. The 4-person stood. "We find the defendant guilty of arson resulting in death." Murmurs filled the room. But then,
with diminished mental capacity. The courtroom froze. It meant no death penalty. Instead, life imprisonment with psychiatric care and mandatory review every 10 years. A year later, documentaries were already filming. Lawmakers in Sacramento drafted what they called the AI Intent Act, requiring investigators to prove a physical act alongside digital planning before charging capital crimes. Universities built scholarships in the victims' names. Tech companies funded wildfire prevention AI tools, a bitter irony, using the same technology to predict and stop new fires. In Pasadena Palisades, survivors planted 12 redwoods. Each tree carries a plaque, a name, a date, a single line. The world remembers. Children now play near those trees, their laughter echoing against charred hills slowly healing to green. 3 months into his sentence, Rinderknecht wrote one more letter to his sister. It was later read in court filings. "They call me the AI Arsonist, but maybe I was just the match they were waiting for. When you tell machines to imagine, they will." The mistake was thinking imagination ends at the screen. That letter became evidence for historians, a warning, a confession, and a question that lingers for anyone who creates in the digital age. Every technological leap leaves a crime behind it. Photography had forgery, telephones had wiretaps, computers had hacking. Now, artificial intelligence has intent. The Palisades fire taught investigators to read the invisible, the patterns behind the pixels. It also reminded the world that empathy must evolve as fast as our machines. Somewhere in a federal facility, Rinderknecht sits in a therapy room, painting with charcoal instead of code. He sketches the same thing every day: a hillside, a city skyline, and a tiny figure watching it burn. But now, at the edge of the paper, he draws rain. We live in an age where thought becomes code, and code can become catastrophe. But between the spark and the fire, there is still choice. The Palisades tragedy showed us how fragile that choice can be. One person, one machine, one idea taken too far. It also showed us resilience, how cities rise again, how families rebuild, how truth surfaces even from ashes. Perhaps justice isn't about punishment or revenge. Perhaps it's about clarity, seeing through the smoke and finding what really burned. So tonight, when you close your screen and the glow fades from your room, remember, technology doesn't create evil. It simply amplifies what's already inside us. And sometimes, that's the scariest fire of all.